The train rattled along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter blending with the hum of conversation and the occasional squeak of luggage shifting overhead. It was one of those dreary afternoons where the sky seemed undecided, neither fully gray nor bright enough to lift spirits. I sat by the window, staring out at the blur of trees and telephone poles, my mind adrift in thoughts I couldn't quite pin down. The seat beside me had been empty when I boarded, but that changed a few stops later. A man slid into the space next to me, his movements deliberate yet unhurried. He wore a dark coat, slightly worn at the cuffs, and carried a leather satchel that looked older than he was. His face was unremarkable, neither strikingly handsome nor particularly memorable, but there was something about him that caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he glanced around the cabin before settling in, as if scanning for something, or someone. Or maybe it was the faint smile that lingered on his lips, neither warm nor cold, just present. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, though he'd already made himself comfortable. His voice was calm, almost soothing, with a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "No, go ahead," I replied, shifting slightly to give him more room. Politeness dictated that I return to my own world, perhaps pull out my book or scroll through my phone, but curiosity got the better of me. There was something oddly familiar about him, though I couldn't say why. For a while we sat in silence, the kind that feels companionable rather than awkward. Then without warning, he spoke again. "You look like someone who appreciates a good story." I turned to him, surprised. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged, leaning back against the seat. "Just a guess. You've got that thoughtful look people get when they're lost in their heads, like you're piecing together fragments of something bigger." I laughed softly, unsure whether to feel flattered or unnerved. "Well, you're half right. I do spend a lot of time thinking, but stories? Not so much lately." "Shame," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Stories are what connect us. They remind us we're not alone, even when it feels like we are." There was a weight to his words, a depth that suggested he wasn't just making idle conversation. Something about the way he spoke, the cadence, the choice of phrases, felt practiced, as if he'd rehearsed this moment countless times. Still, I found myself intrigued. "You sound like someone who tells stories for a living." His smile widened, revealing a row of perfectly straight teeth. "Not exactly. Let's just say I've lived a few worth telling." That piqued my interest. "Care to share one?" He hesitated, glancing out the window as if weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but fair warning, it might hit closer to home than you expect." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical but willing to play along. "Hit me." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Once upon a time, there was a man named Daniel. He worked a desk job in the city, spent his evenings watching TV, and generally kept to himself. Nothing remarkable about him, really. Except for one thing, every morning he took the same train to work, and every day he saw the same woman sitting across from him." The description sent a jolt through me, though I tried not to show it. "Go on." "This woman, let's call her Claire, was different. She always had a book in hand, her nose buried in pages, while the rest of us scrolled through our phones. Sometimes she'd glance up, catch Daniel staring, and smile politely before returning to her reading. For weeks, months even, that was all there was between them. Fleeting eye contact, brief smiles, nothing more. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he knew her from somewhere. Not recently, but before. The train swayed gently as we passed over a bridge, the sound of rushing water beneath us momentarily drowning out his voice. When he continued, his tone had shifted, growing quieter, more intimate. One day, Daniel decided to act on his curiosity. He struck up a conversation, asking her what she was reading. To his surprise, she didn't brush him off. Instead, she told him about the book, a novel set during wartime, and they ended up talking for the entire ride. By the time they reached their stop, they had exchanged names and promised to meet again the next day. I listened intently, my earlier skepticism giving way to genuine fascination. And did they?
Oh, yes. Day after day, they met on the train, sharing stories, laughter, even dreams. Over time, Daniel realized he felt happier than he had in years. Claire brought light into his otherwise mundane existence. But then, he paused, letting the tension build. One morning, she didn't show up.
My stomach tightened, though I couldn't explain why. Did he try to find her? He did. Called her number, visited her address, even went to the police. But no one could tell him where she'd gone. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. At first, he convinced himself she'd simply moved away, started a new life somewhere else. But deep down, he suspected the truth was far stranger. What truth? I asked, unable to help myself. The man leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine. Claire wasn't just some random commuter, she was a ghost. The word hung in the air, heavy and surreal. I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or demand an explanation. A ghost? Seriously? He nodded solemnly. According to local legend, Claire had died decades earlier in a car accident near the very station where Daniel boarded each morning. Her spirit lingered, appearing only to those who needed her most. People like Daniel, stuck in routines that left them hollow inside. She offered them companionship, a reminder of what it meant to truly live, even if only for a short while. I shook my head, trying to process what he was saying. That's quite a tale. Did Daniel ever figure it out? He did, the man said, his expression softening. But by then, it was too late. She was gone, leaving behind only memories, and a single photograph tucked inside his wallet. A picture of the two of them standing together, smiling as if nothing unusual had happened. Proof that she'd been real, at least to him. Silence fell between us, broken only by the steady rhythm of the train. I studied him carefully, searching for any sign that he was joking, but his demeanor remained earnest, almost reverent. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. He smiled faintly, reaching into his satchel. Because sometimes, stories aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors, reflecting pieces of ourselves we'd rather ignore. With that, he pulled out a small, weathered photograph and placed it on the seat between us. My breath hitched as I picked it up, recognizing the faces immediately. One was unmistakably him, younger, but undeniably the same man sitting beside me. The other was me. How? I stammered, my pulse quickening. This isn't possible. It isn't, he agreed, his voice gentle, unless you believe in second chances. Before I could respond, the train lurched to a stop, the conductor announcing my station over the intercom. Panic surged within me, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Wait," I said, turning back to him. "Who are you?" His smile was enigmatic, almost sad. "Someone who remembers you, even if you don't remember me. Take care, Daniel." And with that, he stood, disappearing into the crowd before I could follow. I sat there for a moment, clutching the photograph, my mind racing. Was this real? Had I somehow forgotten an entire chapter of my life? Or was I losing my grip on reality? As I stepped off the train, the chill of the autumn air snapped me back to the present. Yet the questions lingered, swirling in my mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind. Who was that man? And why did his story feel so achingly familiar? It wasn't until days later, while sorting through old boxes in my attic, that I found it. A faded journal filled with entries written in my own handwriting. Entries detailing a woman named Claire, a train ride, and a friendship that had changed everything. The final page bore a single sentence, scrawled in bold letters. Some connections transcend time. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Whatever had happened on that train, whoever that man was, one thing was clear. Some stories refused to stay buried.